notes.
Does anyone use this on a PC?
Yes. We don't have
No, I don't have it.
Did you send the slides to anybody's email?
They're shared. So if you've got it, just get the Apple up.
Okay. There you go. Just somebody's put their hand up halfway through the session. I'm proposing we add another group in, so we've got actually 5 pictures, which makes it 15 minutes each. Is that okay?
15 minutes?
Yep. So I'm going to turn my stopwatch on.
or from when we get the computer going.
Yeah, I don't have the slides, so do you have the
They're
slides?
shared, mate.
Oh yeah, I've got it. Do you want me to give them on that?
Yeah, just
I've got the document, but not the slides. Maybe you've got it. Sorry, Neil.
fair enough.
Still nothing.
No, it's going to be done.
Change forwards near that work change forwards. Try a different floor.
It'll be right.
No, there we go. Okay, starting now. Go.
Okay, so this group is presenting the non-human centered. So it's a design research group around post-anthropocene.
For those, you would recognise that as an image of Tasmania and the recent fires that have swept across the southwest.
Okay, so it's really a focus on humans and non-humans, or times non-humans, rather than humans versus non-humans, which is maybe an orientation we're a bit more used to with some of our design disciplines. It's really a response to post-anthropocene. So this project looks to seed investigations into non-human centered design practices and worlds. It's a project that enables conversations around this concept. So those concepts to be discussed, extended, demonstrated through material and other examples, experiences, and also quite a lot of use of reflection. Did you want to talk to this thing?
Yeah, well this is, it's just, I mean it's a geological map that I came across a few years ago, but I think what's important here is it shows both temporally and spatially a different orientation to the world that we live in, the universe that we live in, and our relationship to it. And so this sort of thinking where you can see that humanity is sitting in here in this sort of 2 metre daily sort of seconds, minutes, hours, days scale, and then this going out to 10 to the 9th years. And yet, although our blinkers orientate us to this moment, yet this, and this is obviously just looking at geology, this is would require a total reorientation of that capacity to perceive, and thus reorient our understanding of what it is to be human. And yet, the effect of our work and also design, so this also meets that whole design anxiety, is there's a trail here which is building of the impact of humanity in this space that we live, which is coming out here. You can see, you know, glaciers and the atmosphere and all that.
Yeah, potentially an acceleration of some of that through the outcomes of climate change, etc. as well. There's a group called the Social Practice Group who originated here, Beyond Behaviour Change Group, which consisted primarily of the research of Yolandi Strangers and Cecily Meller, and their work is really around using practice theory to explain the world. They've just published a book, which was actually launched in the room downstairs last Friday, around dynamic non-humans and their practices. So that explores anything from fields of wheat, PET bottles, cats on vacuum cleaners, and actually looking at their perspective and their practices rather than focusing on an anthropometric sort of view of practices. So there's some interesting work going on in the practice space as well. Sarah's coming in a couple of weeks to the School of Design, and she's got a project she's connected to around seed libraries, but actually focusing on a community sort of hub of conservation with a focus on biodiversity that isn't necessarily human-led or human-centered, but rather plants and that kind of.
And soon you'll get an event right invite actually, just so ownership, but she's going to give a workshop. And
there's quite a bit of work that's been done in industrial design honours around this as well, where students have been looking at designing for nature, for species. This was a project that Lachlan Majors did a few years ago, where he designed beehives for bees, not beehives for humans, for bees. So not to be disturbed, pillaged for honey, rather to actually expand bee populations, which, as we know, are under threat with various human-based interventions in the world. So there's some examples. Another example, this one, did you want to talk about this, Andy?
It's self-evident.
Yep.
This work is kind of, it gives agency to the goldfish through computer vision and some algorithms. There's a video of it, but you can imagine if we need to save some time, depending on the direction of the goldfish, the robot moves around the room, and it gets us questioning, that potential agency for non-humans. It's an illustrative one, I guess. Yep.
So there's quite a few sort of examples and quite disparate nodes of work around this focus on the non-human through design, practice, agency, etc. Really, this is a response to impending wicked problems as well. So, extreme climate change, peak resources, ecological system breakdown. So, exploring the notion of whether non-human-centered design, rather than this more common orientation of human-centered design, could be something that could facilitate better outcomes. We'd look at it through creative practice and seek to provoke inquiry, question what happens when humans are actually no longer the centre of what we're focusing upon with our practice. We're looking to confront contradictions as well. There's going to be paradoxes in this kind of work. So, this idea of privilege. Now, who decides what's privileged over human needs? The privileged position of humans in this conversation as well, that's actually obviously a paradox. And how we decide on what's prioritised, or what decides on what is prioritised. Is it humans who actually do that either through this process? There's quite a cross-disciplinary group who's interested in looking at this, and in the meeting we had on Monday, it was amazing to see this sort of really take off, get quite combative at times, great arguments, but also some commonalities where we want to go with this. Quite a few ECRs from all disciplines, and quite a few more established researchers as well. And within those conversations, this thing is quite a big beast. There's a lot of stuff we could explore, a lot of themes that we could explore with this group. So things like animal-computer interaction, kind of thing we just described with Andy, machine learning and artificial intelligence, and that also connected to futuring potentially, co-design, healthcare, well-being, questions that are human-centered, and also the non-human understanding of what's possible there. Human well-being in a post-anthropocene age. So if we actually get past impacting for permanent change in the world and we actually pull back from that, what does it look like past that? And what does it even look like when we're not here? So one of the ideas was actually projecting what happens once the humans are gone. what does that look like? What does the world do then? Systems thinking, so questioning.
Just let you guys know you've got 6 minutes total left.
Yeah, we're almost there. So questioning the systems designing and existing designs and rewriting those rules of design. Extinction management. Again, you know, that idea like Lachlan's project, design for bees rather than not designing for humans for bees as a point of difference. And extending that into other biospherical elements like repatriation and rewilding as well. And also, how do we discuss these things that are on the fringe? Because some of these, you know, the edge of some of this is quite uncomfortable. Things like what happens after humans is a pretty, you know, contentious type of thing to be discussing. But appropriate if we're talking about non-humans. You know? It should be part of the discussion. When I disappear, something else appears. Well, what is that? And, you know, what does that mean in terms of the next temporal periods of the world, of the Earth as well? It's quite a lot of background reading. Also, to add to this, probably some of the stuff that we talked about with Yolandi and Cecily, which leads to potential collaborations and links. So there's the Critical Intimacies group, which Toni is a part of here at RMIT, which is very much connected to this. The practice group, so both at RMIT and also Yolandi and Sarah Pink now moving to Monash, potential for cross-institutional collaboration with this work. And there's also international links that we could be drawing upon, like there's a course, for instance, in Norway looking at designing for non-human clients, which has some really interesting assets and resources that we could be drawing upon collaborations. And the investigation we've already sort of started to nut out and think about are things like extinction management, repatriation and rewilding, non-human futures, that's probably one of the more uncomfortable ones. Multi-species storytelling. There's actually a conference that Yoko attended last year, which was in Norway, Finland, Sweden, one of the Scandinavian countries. I've got two of them. Which was basically a whole range of papers looking at things like birdsong, flocking, cultural probes that aren't human-centered, etc. And also the Marisol de la Cadena as well, so the world of many worlds. So we're asking for a budget. What we're looking to do is actually spread this equitably across the group, which will enable this year 2 workshops, similar I suppose to the first group, to explore this further and come up with some both physical and virtual or digital outcomes or provocations, with a view that we go to the DRS next year to look at some special interest groups around this idea of non-human design. What that budget will be used for will include things like use of materials and tools, workshops, so 3D printing, laser cutting, also computer programming assets, you know, featuring a digital simulation of what some of these scenarios might actually look like. We'll also need obviously space and catering for those workshops and exhibition spaces to actually show off what we've actually come up with through this process. As we've identified, there's a couple of conferences that could be quite interesting to present some of these outcomes at, which we already have connections to. There may be some other written resources we need to also draw upon, and also management of some of this work as well. Non-human centered.
Thank you.
2 minutes under time.
There's just over 2 minutes for questions.
I mean, we should work with you guys.
Have you got any non-humans on your team?
I've got my mentor.
We need to recruit. We need to recruit someone.
Well, all of our bodies are also full of non-human
Yeah.
beings as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yoko, do you want to talk about the paper that was presented by the PhD candidate around virus?
Oh yeah, so I went to this multi-species storytelling conference, and what it does reveal, like what was said by Simon, is like I was a bit worried about this just being this reaction of guilt by these privileged, largely white people who live in very comfortable, and them being the or we being responsible for largely the climate change impacts. But there were some interesting papers, one which was by this first-year PhD student, I couldn't believe it, and he talked about how you coexist and live with HIV/AIDS, and his whole point was, you know, the virus being the non-human coming into your body, and the storytelling of that is the symptoms that one has, and what does it mean to think about the, you know, the potential consequences of HIV/AIDS, but the stigma that's associated with it, and people who choose to also be HIV/AIDS in the first place more proactively. So it was a really great talk that actually sought to question a lot that I felt were bypassed in a lot of this stuff. So I would really welcome our conversations to be about that rather than, oh, aren't birds pretty and it's so lovely. There's a whole heap of that's going on as well, which feels a little bit not quite the point of what this is about.
Okay, one more question or comment? Brilliant.
Interesting.
Interesting?
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks, Leah.
I just wanted to keep it short. My last 10 seconds.
The book by Yolandi and Cecily as well is really interesting in that respect, right? You have to acknowledge straight up we're humans, right? So there's a paradox in what we're doing here, but at the same time, there's a lot of really interesting work around, you know, using ethnography or practice research or, you know, storytelling, going into these maybe deep dark places to draw upon for inspiration, and also maybe to replicate some of their methods, techniques. I mean, that book is really interesting because they basically was just a free-for-all on what the non-human was. They didn't define what it was. So they literally had people writing about PET bottles, fields of wheat, and cats. It's sort of an amazing space in that regard. Look like it's open for so much interpretation.
Can I make one more comment? Just that the post-human research into the post-humanism is, you know, really taking off globally, but I think that design has something very particular to offer this discussion, particularly in being able to make material and digital prototypes to actually take the discussion a bit further and the examination further and propose speculative and critical kind of interventions into the world.
And probably that's a differentiation between something like Cecily and Yolandi, who are really more observing.
Yeah, and that's probably the thing to really articulate is what does design bring to that discourse, and what might those outcomes be, and what is the value and the benefit of those to promoting
But
discourse.
also critique design too.
Yeah.
Because this comes out, the presenters and attendees of the conference and the one I went to was really having a disciplinary crisis about what the fuck are we really doing and making, particularly because design's become so powerful, it's become this systems now. That's, you know, it's kind of what you guys are saying. So for us, I think the question really is how does these things that we do that are beyond, so this is the extra discipline thing, but I think you have to come back to disciplines again to really question what we're teaching.
Well, it does. At one point, I think in design, you start to ask, what are we doing in our field in moments where the human may not be agent or subject. And one such thing, for example, is a non-human photography that Zielinski's just published on. So with all the imaging that we have in the world where humans are neither subject nor agent, it makes you rethink photography. And I think design can do a similar inquiry. What happens when humans start becoming removed from that equation? Sorry, Oliver.
I think here's an overlapping also in what you know, how we think about it. And what you just explained is a big overlap now.
Well, somebody said on Monday, 5 years from now, I heard this term, like, what are we researching 5 years from now? I don't know if it was Jules or something. That struck me. So, like, what happens, you know, so there is just now in Norway, we were talking about, so they're looking at what happens when your client is not human. And I thought this was a really striking concept for study.
Okay, just for everybody, I just want to thank you again.
That was good.
Simon.
I I know, I can't believe it.
Presenter. You paste that.
Only got a short period of time.
That was very good. Neil jumped in with time and went cosmic, but then